Do you see neo-Nazi activity as a left-wing movement?
Well, these are political concepts about left-right, but what is most important is that radical Islamic extremism and neo-Nazi ideology, however people may choose to frame that in a left-right continuum, that they are included. And I say this because victims' families are demanding it. And if you have listened to the Prime Minister and his ministers over the last 3 weeks, they actually haven't confronted the issue of radical Islamic extremism in their language or their intentions, and it is absolutely vital that we do. And I want to remind Australians today of what I and my team have been saying all along, which is that if you practice radical Islamic hatred, if you incite violence, if you glorify terrorism, and you are not an Australian citizen, you will be deported, and if you are an Australian citizen, you will be arrested.
Sorry, just to clarify there. Within the political spectrum, in your interpretation, are neo-Nazis far left activists?
Far left and neo-Nazi extremism were the words that I used. Yes.
Ms. Ley, do you think that terms of reference for a New South Wales Royal Commission could be expanded in a way that ensures that the presence and the accountability of federal entities and federal ministers it's within the border as a potential
Well, no, I don't. And this is very clear and a critical distinction between a state-based Royal Commission and a federal Royal Commission. The first and most important point is, why would you not have a federal Royal Commission when anti-Semitism is a national crisis that covers all jurisdictions, all levels of society, and reaches into every corner of this country when you listen to people's lived experience? And the Premier in New South Wales has said that he will call a New South Wales Royal Commission. We haven't seen the terms of reference, and it will be about the event and other matters. But it won't be what it needs to be with respect to our national security agencies, the national intelligence that they have received, the way that that has been transmitted to our federal ministers and our federal government, and the actions that they have or have not taken in response to that. These are all clearly matters within the purview of the federal government. And if we have so many Australians from so many walks of life with so much experience in areas which would demand that their opinions be listened to, who are calling for a Commonwealth Royal Commission, it still does beg the question, why is the Prime Minister not listening?
Would you support one that, while it maintains an attachment to anti-Semitism and an attachment to the attack, departs in some substantial way from the terms of reference you've already proposed? Would you be able to support that?
Well, you're asking me whether I would be able to support something that I haven't seen, and clearly I can't answer that. But what we have said to the Prime Minister is, here are our terms of reference. They are necessarily and appropriately wide and include the critical areas that I've mentioned today. We're happy to refine those with the Prime Minister, but we've consulted closely with victims' families. We understand the real pain that not just Jewish Australians, but Australians in our communities have felt in response to this terror attack, and that they are now looking to their Prime Minister for leadership, for honesty, for answers. Not getting any of those things. It is time to it is time for the Prime Minister to come out of hiding and address the reality of the necessity for this Commonwealth Royal Commission. But to your main point, we stand ready to work with the government to refine our terms of reference, and of course we will look at anything that they propose. But our three components mentioned this morning are the starting point.
The Prime Minister yesterday confirmed he would be calling Parliament early to pass the speech reforms. Have you had any more conversations with the Prime Minister, and do you believe we're any closer to seeing that legislation?
I had some conversations with the Prime Minister earlier this week, and no dates were set. It's the Prime Minister's decision when Parliament comes back, and I said then what I say today is that it isn't coming back early if it comes back before its scheduled first sitting date. It's still coming back too late to address the crisis of anti-Semitism and the crisis of the Bondi terror attack. Parliament should have come back before the end of last year, and any day that we are not coming back is a day where it is a day wasted to get on with the really important work of addressing what our proposed Commonwealth Royal Commission would do.
On that legislation, would you support updated hate speech legislation if it includes sexuality as well as race and religion?
I want to be very clear. Tackling hate speech is not a licence to go after free speech. There are clear issues that this legislation needs to address. It needs to be targeted to the threats that we face. And those threats are radical Islamic extremism and anti-Semitism. That's what we want to see in this legislation. That's what our urgent call to action, not just ours, but the nation's urgent call to action following the Bondi terrorist attack should be addressing.
So if the government does put up legislation that includes protections for sexuality, for disability, that kind of speech, would you oppose it? Would you try and convince your colleagues in the coalition to support it?
Well, that's an appropriate question for the time when we see it, but I really want to make my point very clear. That's actually not what we would expect to see or need to see in any legislation that comes forward. That is not what this is about. And that would be a Prime Minister who was not confronting fairly and squarely the issue that so far he has failed to confront, which is radical Islamic extremism and the consequences of letting that go unchecked, and what that has meant for Australians and particularly Jewish Australians since October the 7th, 2023.
Today is the funeral of one of the Bondi shooting victims, Myanmar. Do you have a message for the family and will you be attending?
I will be attending, and my message is always one of great support, incredible distress on behalf of what the family has experienced, and great warmth as they go through yet another difficult day.
You've said numerous times that the government should, the Prime Minister should have recalled Parliament before Christmas. Given the complexity of the legislation and potential High Court challenges, do you think that that was a fair timeline to have set?
It was a fair timeline to have set, and at the time I offered the coalition's support with drafting any legislation. Remember, when the NZYQ cohort hit the streets, the government was all at sea, and it was the coalition who stepped in with our expertise and actually helped to draft the right legislation, given that the government's legislation was not right and not fit for purpose. But this is just a series of excuses from this Prime Minister, and we've just had excuse after excuse to give real recognition and real understanding, not just to victims' families, but to the national crisis of anti-Semitism that we face. We should have come back as a parliament before Christmas. The New South Wales Parliament came back. We should have been talking about these issues. We should be talking about them now in the national parliament.
Can I just get your story from today's paper? It was about the eviction of a US drug enforcement agency by the AFP and highlights the division between the state and federal police. Do you think that this adds to the growing concerns that we've seen around issues like intelligence sharing and inter-agency communication that have emerged since then?
You wouldn't expect me to comment on the details of that. While I've just seen the story in brief, it is a matter for the services and agencies involved.
In a potential Royal Commission, a big part of it is going to be defining anti-Semitism. Is there a preferred definition the coalition has, perhaps the IRA definition, and are you concerned about the slowness that the debate over the definition of that?
There's lots of things to debate, but that's probably because the Parliament, the Prime Minister, has not been clear. And I'm giving him the opportunity to put forward the right legislation, the right terms of reference for a Commonwealth Royal Commission, the right changes to hate speech to reflect radical Islamic extremism and anti-Semitism, and that will include appropriate definitions. But one of the suggestions that we made with the comprehensive package that we also put forward over 3 weeks ago was that Gillian Seagull's position and what she has done as the anti-Semitism envoy be made a statutory body, and that be something that's ongoing and therefore works in every sector of Australian society with respect to anti-Semitism, because we haven't seen enough action when it comes to our university campuses, our arts bodies, civil society, and all of that work has been sitting, gathering dust on the Prime Minister's desk since Gillian Segal released her report over 6 months ago.
Last question.
Just on a local issue, if I may, there are some calls from the Jewish community to memorialise the footbridge that was at the centre of the Pride attacks, and calls to rename Archer Park until the beating on it of the general victim. Is that something you'd support, and do you think that's an appropriate way to?
What I would say is that it's very important in any decisions that are made that the victims' families and those that experienced the horror firsthand be closely consulted. And I'm sure that the local council and the state government will be doing exactly that. Thank you.
That's the Opposition Leader Sussan Ley speaking there in Sydney, reiterating once again this drumbeat of calls that's growing for the Prime Minister to change his mind and call a Royal Commission into anti-Semitism. Our understanding is that that's not likely to be something that happens today, but the pressure is building and the Prime Minister's language shifting on that yesterday. As for the Opposition Leader, laying out the Coalition's framework of what they would like to see in terms of the details of this Royal Commission.